Well, today on the Treatment Forum, we have creative director, copywriter, and educator Gary Fox-Robertson. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course. Happy to be here.
I,
Happy to chat.
yeah, obviously I'm a big fan of you because I've worked with you before at Digitas on an Aldi project, and you were just, you could just feel the energy around you, that you're just such a creative, soul, always building on ideas. And I really love just hearing about how you are now kind of an educator and,
Hmm.
teaching at the Miami Art School. And it just kind of brought up for me, a great question of just, kind of the very beginning of, why did you get started as a creative director, or copywriter? Like, what motivated you to go into this industry?
Yeah, thank you. It was, as many people, it was accidental. I did not go to a portfolio school. I was actually a reporter first and foremost. I worked as a journalist in Mexico straight out of college. And then, just realized that as much as I enjoyed that, I kind of liked making stuff up more. And so when I got back to London, I kind of found various places that I could use my writing ability. It was the one thing I was really both good at and really enjoyed, was writing in all forms. I'm not, probably with the exception of fiction, I'm not a sort of fiction writer. I don't have some, great American novel, I guess, or great British novel kind of on a hard drive anywhere. I'm not planning to be published in that sense. But I've always just really enjoyed the kind of writing process. And I was just fortunate to be able to kind of work first and foremost in a business to business agency. And then bit by bit, I kind of changed, came over to the States in 2001, and then was very fortunate to work at Leo Burnett on the US Army account, which was just amazing and just crazy and weird and just wonderful in many ways, and odd, and just, as a sort of pacifist Brit working on the US Army was a little weird. But yeah, I've actually kind of really, for me, I've actually really I most enjoy working on projects where I'm not the target, where I'm not really, perhaps not even familiar with the product or the offering, because then that forces you as a writer to do that research and to discover and to talk to people, talk to friends or family or whoever it is, and try and get a better sense of who the audience is. And also, it kind of, you sort of lap up the kind of strategy. And I've just been very grateful to some great strategists that I've worked with over the years, who have enabled me to do some work that resonates. Um, so that's
Yeah.
my story in terms of how I fell into this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that you say that you actually like to dig into projects that aren't your demo and that maybe you're unfamiliar with, because I feel similarly when I, have no clue about a type of product, and then
Mhm.
and then you end up going down the rabbit hole of like something, so niche, like heat pumps or something.
Yes.
Like something like, oh, I never really thought about this, but wow, this is actually so useful. Like I need to get one for my house, and just all, and for example, like Aldi, the campaign, just kind of really learning about where the brand is, pushing and taking themselves and kind of aligning themselves. Like I really love this strategy that I was hearing from you guys, and that I had one that was like not my closest grocery store, but then it really got me very interested in learning the Aldi experience. And then now I'm like such a big proponent and fan. I just talk to everybody like, hey, you got to do the Aldi way. Like, and I love, yeah, I love learning through our work projects
Mhm.
about different, brands and their stories. So it totally
Yeah,
resonates.
I think also for me, one of the things that working on something that's not familiar or that you don't really have much connection with, um, is that you're not necessarily encumbered by all the cliches, right? Or all of the conventions of that, either that brand or indeed that category. So I think it feels a little bit more liberating for me, because you don't necessarily, kind of say, oh, this is how a grocery store commercial is done, or this is how a game social post should work. There's no should, right? And I think that can also be a problem because you don't necessarily know the cliches or the conventions of the category. So you kind of want to immerse yourself a little bit. But I think it opens your mind a little bit. I was struck when I first became a copywriter by a book that I still refer to called Cutting Edge Advertising. I forget who wrote it. It's a book from the 70s, I think, maybe 80s, even before my time. And it was basically, one of the comments was, write a washing machine ad as though it's a car ad, right? Write a car ad as though it's a washing machine ad. So use some of play around with the ingredients. And that's really what, ultimately, if you want to sort of have that metaphor of chefs, right? Play around with unusual ingredients, and then that sometimes yields something great. It sometimes yields something terrible, and you kind of put that to the side. But oftentimes by not necessarily, as I say, being kind of weighted down by some of the cliches or conventions within certain categories, it becomes much more liberating, at least in my experience.
Yeah. There's like a sense of curiosity that I feel like continues to kind of drive you, and experimentation, and they're, also just kind of coming from like a mentor and educator point of view of you teaching. I can just tell that, you allow yourself to, not everything is going to be great, not everything that you write. And so that's how you get to something great, is that you kind of have to, write drafts that are terrible, but the process of mixing it up will lead to something entirely different that you never really thought you'd get to, which is really a beautiful creative process, I think.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I would argue, one of the things I tell my students is that, bad ideas are really important for a couple of
Wow,
reasons,
that's
right?
so
One
cool.
is you've got to sort of flush them out, right? You've
Yeah,
almost got to say them in your mind and write them down, and sometimes even kind of write them. I've written bad ideas and gone pretty far with them. Um, uh, you sort of have to flush them out, and you have to kind of get rid of them before you can get other things. But also, you never know when that spark might happen, that you say something that you kind of think's awful, and then someone, your partner or whoever it is, builds upon it, and then before you know it, it's transmuted into something completely different, miles away from where you started, but it's actually kind of an interesting thing. So I think kind of for me, collaborating with a partner, in my case, kind of an art director partner, has been just an incredible experience, in that, especially if you have that trust, right? If you've built up enough trust and enough ability to basically look foolish in front of them, you have to sort of say, okay, I'm going to be foolish. I'm going to say something completely ridiculous that is just the worst idea ever,
yeah,
but maybe it will spark something.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It has to be like a safe place, because
Yes,
that's
yes,
yeah. Yeah,
100%.
well, no, that gives so much kind of foundation to really understanding your character. So let's sort of let's pivot into chatting about, when you are working on a project, and you're kind of doing revisions, just to kind of give us, from the audience is typically likely more of an emerging director, emerging photographer, and they're trying to learn more about the pitch process to better equip them with how that works, like more about how the treatment process is from, the agency point of view. And so it's really good to know, when things come to us, it's probably been months in the making. So, would love to just get a sense of like, how long are you typically working on something until you are ready to bring it to production partners?
Yeah, it can be months. Obviously, I would argue that the timelines have shortened over
Yeah.
my career.
Yeah.
It used to be a lot longer, but I don't always think that time is our friend necessarily,
Hmm.
because sometimes things linger around a bit, and you kind of overanalyze them, and you end up like changing things that don't need changing. But generally, I'd say like a month or two between the beginnings of when you first get briefed, you present to the client, you do your tweaks, and then you're kind of ready to start thinking about engaging directors or getting a sense of who out there could bring your vision to life. And in fact, actually saying you bring your vision to life is probably not right thing to say, because it's not really my vision per se. I think there's a vision, and it's not I think you can't find yourself too trapped by this is exactly how it has to be, right? Otherwise, why are you hiring somebody to do it for you, right? You don't want, in the same way, I don't just want to be kind of a typist. I don't want a director who's just going to shoot what I came up with. You know what I'm saying? They have to be, and it's not even we have to sort of almost stumble upon a vision together, is how I would phrase it. If I come too hot and heavy and say like this is how it has to be, then where's the creativity, right? And where's the flexibility? So ideally, I love engaging with directors. I have to say, I love that part of the process because it just takes things to just a whole new level. That's just really exciting.
That's so cool to hear. It's like a very like democratic point of view. Like it's not my vision. It's a collective vision for a cause of this brand in a way. And it's so cool to hear that that's your favorite part of the process. Because I think it really depends on the person. Like sometimes they do really feel a lot of ownership to it, or the client, you've gone through so many revisions that you don't want somebody to throw a wrench in something that's totally crazy, but you're very open to those, that process, which I think is really cool, because I think there's a special relationship between the directors and the creatives that we sort of mull it out, and then we decide, then you decide like, okay, let's bring this to the client. It's kind of, it's passing through the filter of like what, because you've been working with them for months, or, you're just very familiar with what can be pushed and how to present things to get something to kind of be
right,
move through the process. So when you are, the traditional pitch, at least from my point of view, is there's maybe a triple bid, and there's three people that, three reels that feel aligned, that then you are going to move forward with bidding and treating and all those things. So from your point of view, when like your producers or the EPs are kind of sending you like links and you're like, find your favorite three, I would love to kind of understand like how that process is for you, and kind of what you're looking for, or how you sort of, you and your art director and your team decide on the three people that you might think would be the best, if they're each going to give something different, or are you looking for, a very clear vision of the spot that like they need to know how to direct children, or like something like that.
Right. Well, there are those factors, of course, sort of your comedy directors, right, versus the sort of perhaps more sort of cinematographics cinema, whatever the word would be, like kind of big sort of productions without dialogue. So obviously there are those sort of little aspects, whether it's kids, whether it's animals, whether it's comedy, whether it's serious or whatever. You are certainly looking for that. I'll be frank, in that initial process, I rely very heavily on the producers that I work with. And again, I find having a great relationship with a producer and trusting your producer and making your producer part of the creative team as much as humanly possible just helps you. And, you want to, of course, you're going to go for the basics, right? You need to make sure that these people can, frame things properly, and that they look like they can get great performances, and, they have a great eye. But to be honest, for me, as a copywriter, and maybe it's, I tend to rely again on my producer and art director at that stage more, I would argue. I almost rely on them to get me to the conversation stage. And I think that for me, that's where it comes to life, right? Because I'm going to be sitting on the set with this person for a day, 2 days, whatever it is going to be. And I want to feel that I can work with them, right?
Yeah.
And, too often on reels, I don't want to see I don't want to see my ad on their reel, right? Obviously, in terms of, I don't want to see I don't want to feel that they're just going to phone this in. That is something that they have done numerous times. I'm kind of looking for perhaps just something weird, and something that just kind of sparks something in me that goes, oh my God, I would never have thought at all that this person would be right, but look what they're doing. They're doing something really interesting. Maybe we can start pushing it in this direction.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of always open to, as I say, while I said earlier that, I don't have a vision, of course, you still have something in your mind. It'd be foolish not to say, but I love when that gets disrupted. I
Yeah.
love when you go, oh my goodness, that is just nowhere near where I was thinking, but it's awesome. And for
Yeah.
me, I have a tendency in my work, I would argue, such as if there is a theme, I tend towards simplicity. I really like simple things. I'm a simple
Yeah.
man. Um, and I think the simpler the spot, the harder it is to nail down a director, right? Because there's really not that many places to add.
Yeah.
If it's just a really stripped down spots like the ones we did for Aldi, for example, there's not a lot to add. Or at first you think there's not a lot to add. And then so when you see directors and they come back with these treatments that just change the angle, that's just so exciting.
Yeah.
They go, oh my God, again, I'm looking for, just like what I look for with my students or junior copywriters or junior art directors that work under me or that I'm mentoring or whatever. I'm looking for something that I couldn't possibly do, right?
Mhm.
And I don't mean that in an arrogant way necessarily, although perhaps a little bit, but I mean it in I just want someone to like blow my mind ultimately. Um,
Yeah, bring something to the table that yeah, I'm always looking for crew that are, that have assets that are like something I could never, yeah, fill in the gap of my knowledge and we come together to make something completely, bananas and like, yeah, yeah, like your hat.
yes, completely bananas
Yeah,
like
yeah.
mine.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear just different perspectives and how you look at things. And that does lead to, yeah, because as a copywriter, it's really just in the writing, but then, on another level, it's kind of growing from there. But talking now, segueing to the creative call and, where you feel that connection or, where you feel that there's collaboration, once you have those creative calls with the different directors, after you kind of get off of those, do you have like a very clear feeling of who is the one that you feel resonates the most? Like based on those calls, is that sort of like, oh, this is the one, this is the person that's gonna make it
Yeah,
happen?
usually I have to
Yeah,
say, not
yeah,
always, but for the most part, you just get that vibe.
yeah.
Again, it comes down to just like everything else, right? It comes down to that relationship.
Agree.
Is this person going to be open to ideas? Are they going to be fun to work with? Is it going to be something that, that I'm proud of at the end of it?
Yeah,
And are they bringing something new, right? Are they bringing something unexpected and new?
hmm,
Um, it's not always possible to know whether directors are sort of phoning it in, right? Let's be
right,
honest.
right.
But you can kind of glean from
Hmm.
the calls about whether these are, again, you want to work with decent human beings, right? I think that
Yeah.
probably kind of trumps talent in some ways.
Mm.
And so just leaning towards just getting that vibe from them. And sometimes the initial call it gives you a vibe and you're like, I really want to work with this person, but I'm slightly worried about, X, Y, and Z. I don't think they necessarily got it. But then that is often turned around when you get to the treatment stage. You go, oh, okay. Maybe they didn't, some people give good phone, right? Um, you know, they,
Yeah.
they, they're really able to just tell a story and sort of engage you and kind of draw you in. And then you get the treatment and it's mediocre or lackluster. Um, and again, that's always a disappointment, right?
Yeah.
But usually I've just had I feel in my career, I've just been very fortunate to work with just a great range of people. It's always a fun thing. Like when a director, when a producer sends that meeting maker that says, director call with, XYZ person, that's a fun day in
Yeah.
advertising. That's
Oh,
a fun
cool.
meet. Of all the meetings we have, these
Yeah.
are some of the more fun ones,
Changing or
right?
yeah, rewrite or whatever. Yeah. Oh, so cool. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're leading perfectly to the next questions because just kind of digging in further about, has a treatment ever shifted your decision on maybe somebody didn't do good, give good phone, and then they just wowed you with the treatment. And so you think, oh, I thought I was going with this person. And then through the process, you realize, oh, wow, like these ideas are much more aligned
Yeah,
than.
100%. I won't name names, but there was, this is going back in my career now, when I was working on Nintendo.
Mhm.
Um, we sort of went for some of the classic, the comedy directors,
Mhm.
and the sort of youthful directors. And there was a director who wasn't really, who was definitely more about beauty and more about, he was a photographer and more about, um, he wasn't really about fast paced and action and or really comedy, but there was something about his treatment that was so intriguing and so mannered and so thoughtful. And it was clear that, at least to me, and again, I don't know all of the story behind it, but like, in terms of what was going through his mind, but it was clear that this was something that was a little bit out of his comfort zone, but was something he was embracing. And there was just such a confidence and such a kind of let's do this together feel to it that we ended up um, working with him for, I don't know, a couple of years, I think it was in the end. We ended up shooting, I don't even know how many spots we shot with him in the end, 15, 20 spots in the end. Um, and again, it was not really, if you'd looked at his reel, you would go, this guy's not, I mean, he had awards, he wasn't a nobody. He was a very famous director already, but this wasn't his wheelhouse, so to speak. But he just blew us away with the treatment. It was just that it was so clear that this is something he wanted to do. And it was also clear from his treatment that this was something he was committed to doing. He knew that we weren't really looking for kind of a one-off director. We weren't planning to be quote unquote sort of promiscuous. We did have this launch of this campaign and we had intended our dream was to work with one person, you know,
Yeah.
to have that consistency and to have that kind of the director as part of the creative team.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, so that was probably one where the phone call initially wasn't as inspiring, but the treatment was just incredible.
Wow. Yeah, such a great story. Because the highest compliment would be to feel like I am a part of the creative team and to feel like I'm really adding something, and then I can develop it with you like each year and every campaign or something that we're kind of pushing ourselves further, and that's just the coolest thing ever when I feel like I have a team that I can kind of inject myself into like once or twice a year, and it's such yeah
Absolutely.
it's the highest compliment. But that's really cool to hear that
I do
story.
think though that on that point, I think one of the things that has always bugged me about our industry, and maybe this is to other industries, I can't talk to those, is our desire for the shiny new toy, right? And we used this person before, let's use someone else for no apparent good reason, like I I'm more, if this person worked for this, then let's use them again. Why would we not continue to develop that relationship?
Yeah.
Just in the same way, the more I work on an account, the more I'm likely to know about it and know the ins and outs and have more
Mhm.
kind of sense of it. I
Yeah.
think the same should go for director, but we're often a little fickle. Um,
Yeah.
it's not always, obviously, but yeah, I
Yeah.
wish we weren't quite as fickle, and I wish we stuck to our guns a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I say we, I mean I'm equally to blame.
You.
It's not like I'm
Yeah, well,
not suggesting I'm
everyone.
the only person there.
No, everyone. Yeah. Yeah, completely. I wanted to kind of dig into when you're writing out many rewrites of a script. Do you I think I know the answer based on your other responses, but from your point of view, but I'd love to hear, would you like to hear, or would you like to see like rewrites, and how much of the script should be changed, or alt lines, or is that not what you're looking for? Are you looking for like a tonal change and not rewriting the script that you worked on for so long?
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan, I'll be frank with you, when directors change scripts. I love when they add to scripts,
Yeah.
when they say, hey, like, obviously when I was working on more kind of sort of comedy things, oh, hey, like, what about this as a final punchline? Or what about this as a way in? Um,
Mhm.
if the script just gets rewritten, I don't know,
Mm,
especially because you've gone through it so much. Um, while I am open to the script being written, sometimes it causes more issues, right? Because you're like, well, there's reasons why this script is as it is, right? And while you don't want to be rigid, you also know that there's a process, right? That this has gone through legal, it's gone through X number of rounds of client feedback, and it's all been signed off at the highest levels or whatever it may be. So while I am open to changes, I think there's a balance, right? And I think delivering the scripts that we give you, it's almost like how we sell work in advertising. One of my former creative directors said, like, give the client what they're asking for if they're asking for something specific, and then give them something completely different. But if you don't do if you go to a restaurant and they said, I know you asked for enchiladas, but here's something completely different. Here's a chicken sandwich. You'll be like, well, what? But if they said to you, here are the enchiladas, but you may want to try the chicken sandwich, it's that.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
probably not the best analogy,
No,
but
I like the menu. Yeah, because that feeling of like, what? Why would you give me this? You know,
right.
they're like, did you hear me? And then those questions, did you hear what I said? Like, this is what I want, and those kind of like those things that come up, and that trust needs to be built where, you're not just like exploding something that's been worked on for so long. And,
And that
so
doesn't
yeah,
happen a whole lot. In my
yeah.
experience, it hasn't happened a whole lot. It does. The only time I can think that when it's happened, the few times it's happened, interestingly, or perhaps obviously, the directors have been former ad people,
Oh,
former ad creatives.
yeah, yeah.
So you kind of sort of understand, right? Because, somebody could give me, David Abbott could give me a piece of copy and I'd probably want to rewrite it just by the nature, right? Like,
Yeah,
so I think maybe there's some, and you sort of forgive them a little bit for that. A little bit.
yeah. Interesting. uh, how do you, when you sort of decide, with your team, like, okay, this is the person that we want to, put forward as our favorite. And when you go into that client presentation meeting, or when you go to pitch to your client who you think is the best fit, are you approaching it with like one person in mind that you're sort of, selling them through, or are you presenting all the options and kind of giving a high level of, how does that pitch process to your client, based on the production partners work and from your perspective?
Well, at that point, obviously, there are many factors going into it, right? And the creative
Yeah,
is just one
yeah,
aspect
budget,
of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
That said, I like to go in with one and have a sort of back pocket backup, right? That I don't really want to show unless,
Mhm.
some of the account person is probably there with a PDF ready to go for person two if it all goes pear-shaped.
Uh-huh.
But I like to go in with a sort of confidence and say, this is the person and this is the reasons why. Know your, and try to, as much as possible, head off any potential criticism at the pass, right? So no, you're not going to see X, Y, and Z in their reel, but here's, I, urge you to look at their treatment of or what have you.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think going in confidently with one is always is always best. It's not always practical, right? There are clients who demand that they see. There are clients who demand, and you probably have a question. There's the clients who demand to see the treatments, clients who don't really mind
yeah,
not seeing the treatment. And it sort of, again, a lot depends on, in addition to the other factors, a lot depends on how mature the campaign is, right? Have we set a standard, or are we kind of just trying, are we doing something from the beginning? Is this a
right.
new thing? Do we see this as a long-term plan? Am I ultimately, you're asking the client to have this relationship. And I think, again, not to put too fine a point on it, you want to basically say to the client, this is a long-term relationship. You're going to marry this director, right? At least for the next number of years, or it's just a kind of one and done, right? So a lot of those factors. And again, obviously a lot depends on, the people around you, in terms of, the account folk and the strategists and the support that you get from them, and the trust or otherwise that you build up with the client.
Yeah.
I like to be confident and say, this is the one, but obviously knowing that sometimes, for multiple reasons, the client doesn't want to go with that one. And it's disappointing, right? I'm not going to lie. It's disappointing when you don't get the director you want, because by that time you've sort of almost kind of assumed that that's the person you're going to work with, right? And you've always got really excited about their bringing in, and then that causes its own issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you certainly don't want to crib from one director and tell what director B that director A had this great idea and you should do that. So it can be quite uncomfortable, but I've been fortunate that I think for the most part, directors have been the ones I've chosen. Not always, 100% not always.
And I mean, let's say that your favorite director is like over budget or something. Like, is that not something that you have to address? Does it really? You're like, well, they are more expensive, but this is why the value of them, or it's marginal. Like, do you have to because oftentimes my producers or my they try to separate me. Don't talk about money. Obviously, I don't have to, but there is at a certain point where I have to acknowledge it. Like, I can't be pitching these ideas that just aren't going to fit into the money conversation. Right. So there is a point where I do have to be cognizant of it. And as you're pitching and your favorite person, maybe you don't, or maybe you don't know that they're more expensive. I don't know. Is that shared with you?
It is shared with us by the producer. The producer will come up with here's the breakdown.
Yeah.
And again, you rely on the producer to kind of have done a lot of that sort of backroom negotiation prior to you being involved, right? Or prior to you presenting to the client. And yeah, I have gone to clients where people are considerably over. And, again, I've also been very fortunate to work with great producers over the years, so that you just let them do their thing. And I tend not to involve myself in the money. And yeah, it's a tricky one. It really is a tricky one, but you hope not to be in that situation too many times. I mean, it's rare to have a director that is so far away from your number. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure I've ever had a director that is just like, absurdly away from the number that we had planned.
Yeah.
I'm sure it happens.
Yeah.
I've probably been fortunate that I haven't quite experienced that. Yeah, but there have been deviations, 10, 20% here and there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that makes all the difference. And understandably, right? If the client's got a budget, you can't get blood out of a stone, right? Money's not going to fall from the sky for them. So you just have to sort of suck that up and hope there's another project next time around that you can work with them.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any advice for more emerging directors that, don't really maybe understand this process? Because I'm wondering, is it very obvious to you when you're like on calls with like maybe younger or just, underdeveloped talent that is still kind of figuring the ropes of this crazy ad business that we live in? Like what type of, is there any like do's and don'ts that you would, give to them in the treatment process? And,
well, again, this is this is maybe going to sound a little weird and perhaps a little disconnected and perhaps a little self-contradictory. It wouldn't be the first time I've said something like that. I don't know. I don't want somebody to write a treatment for me. I don't want them. I know what the reality is, right? I know that people are pitching a lot of things and they want the work, right? Who doesn't? Yeah, we all want work, right? We all want to work on good projects. I think sometimes you can tell when people are sort of placating you a little bit and sort of holding back, because the way they'll talk on a phone call and then the way they will actually write it down might be quite different. They might be much more effusive and much more kind of like pushing things. And then when, perhaps when the sort of reality sits in and they have to write it down, they kind of hold themselves back a little bit. And again, I think I understand why, right? It makes perfect sense. You don't want to be sort of controversial, or you don't want to risk not getting the job. But, I think, and again, being true to yourself is such a cliche and perhaps not really appropriate always in our industry, where oftentimes, let's be frank, we have to be true to the money. Not to be too cynical about it, but I've been around a while, so I guess I am a little cynical about it. But I think there's, you want to make sure that they're really, I want to feel that they're into it. And again, that sounds very naive, I guess. I just want to feel that that they want to be there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's not always easy to tell from a call or a treatment that sometimes you're on set and you're like, oh, this person really doesn't want to be here. But I've been fortunate. I've heard more horror stories about that than I've experienced myself. So
Yeah. Would you say then, because oftentimes I'm like, how big, have you ever had it where you do go back to the director and say, we love all of your ideas. You have a day or two between presenting. Can you adjust this for our presentation so we know it's more seamless or something, or remove this image or remove this line. We don't think we'll ever be able to do that or something like that. So that way I have the time to go bonkers with you, and then you can filter and come back.
100%. I mean, we if you've worked on a client long enough, some of the points that are gonna, some of the triggers, right?
Yeah, trigger words, yeah.
Trigger words, like, whether that's spelling the name of the product correctly, or just, or using certain words that the client hates, or certain imagery that the client hates. You want to. It's a weird job because you're both, elevating this person. You want them to be who you are, but at the same time, you sort of have to kind of protect the director a little bit, right? And make sure the director doesn't walk into a punch, so to speak, in terms of going completely crazy. We remove things from treatments. We ask for adjustments. We don't always share I've not shared the whole treatment with clients often, especially the technical stuff. If there's sort of technical things about the lighting or the camera usage, sometimes some clients will ask, but they don't really need to know that. Again, you're just trying to give them a vibe, right? So you hope to be able to kind of help them without over molding the treatment, over influencing it.
I think I have an example of something that, when you create an acronym of a brand that's like 3 words or something that's really long, and you don't want to keep writing the full thing, but then the client hates to be associated by, because you're changing the name, but just for brevity's sake of a treatment, you don't want to, and you're like, can you go back and just not abbreviate their name? It's, it's offensive or something. I just wouldn't have, now I realize those are the things that, as a director you might miss, but you can understand from the brand point of view that could be a trigger or something like that. So that is something that's really interesting, that I like to just get feedback on. Please tell me, what am I not seeing that could be an issue?
Right. And of course you can't always predict every issue, right? Would that we could. And there have been issues with directors that have come up over the years, and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't see that in that, that's not. Sometimes clients will see the reel or see the selected spots that you've chosen, and see the treatment, and they see it so fundamentally different from you do. And then you're sort of, on the back foot, having to kind of justify why this director, and perhaps kind of go back to the well and what have you. But that's thankfully a rare occasion, but it certainly does happen. Where you are so far off from what the client is looking at, or rather how they come to the treatment and how they come to the reel is so fundamentally different from where you're seeing. And again, that often depends on, a client's experience, right? And a client's experience in that field, and how long they've been at the client, how comfortable they are being the client, how comfortable they are being on set, their experience and what have you. And there are obviously unpredictable things as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, we definitely did a deep dive, and there's so many mic drops that I can't wait to like re-listen, because I kind of am present as a conversation, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, that was so juicy. That was so juicy. So thank you so much for
Of
sharing
course,
all of your knowledge from the many clients and agencies
of
that you've
course.
worked at. And I mean, we'd love to hear maybe, where we can find you now. It sounds like you're freelancing
I'm
with different.
freelancing, yeah. I have a question for you actually,
Oh, I
before
love
we wrap
it.
up.
Turn it.
Um, I'm curious what your thoughts are about the directors being paid for treatments. The
Oh,
debate, because I notice, I happen to notice, I go on LinkedIn a lot, obviously as a freelancer, you're always trying to
yeah,
up your game. And I saw a really interesting article. I meant to send it to you, and then
yeah.
got about whether directors should be paid for treatments.
Yeah, that is, it's definitely becoming the conversation is burgeoning up again and again, because I was just talking about this with and I think this podcast will definitely go in that direction, or at least interview and talk to people that are pushing for those things. And there's movements happening in Europe and in Germany that are
Oh,
creating pledges to have this sort of like standard. And I think what the issue is that there is, if we're talking about equity and we're talking about a huge company like Radical that has the resources to be able to put together this huge treatment, and then it really just creates a unlevel playing field for
right.
people coming from like for issues of like diversity reasons, and
Hmm.
just even smaller companies going against the big fish, that they have the resources to have an on staff treatment visualist. And
Right.
then there's these smaller companies or these like underrepresented talent that just don't have the resources to put into this. And I feel very conflicted about it. And I do think that there are ideas to bring it to like the DGA, where perhaps like the union could create some type of minimum requirement or
Hmm.
minimum pay for it. Because what I've seen, because of the pushback, is that there isn't, because there is no compensation for it, that right now it seems like there is this awareness, like it's going into this awareness state where EPs are now not asking everybody. They're not doing like quadruple bids. They're
Right.
very respectful. They'll actually do a chemistry read before they even say, okay, do the treatment, because they know the investment of time, and they're just being
Hmm.
more cognizant of it. And that also, for some reason, the last like 6 months, I've kind of been given at least a week, or maybe even into a weekend, which before it was kind of like, I don't know, this like craziness of just, we need it in 2 days. And, I can't produce something that's
No,
well thought, and that's,
thoughtful.
and I do hope that there is either, it's been weird what's been proposed. I don't know if it'll ever work, that, the EPs will ask the agency. And I have gotten paid once,
Oh, you
and that
have?
was amazing. And that was before the pandemic with Vayner out in New York. And it was because it was an in-house production company. They do everything in their agency.
Mm.
And I think they had the money to pay the directors to pitch. And I used that actually to like create some storyboards and things like that. But that was the one time I thought was, incredible. And what we're trying to do now is like, hey, producer EP, do you have any money that you can like put aside of the budget towards this? And then someone else mentioned to me that, after the whole process of the bidding process, they'll go back to the agency. And if they're not awarded, they'll find out, hey, did you come under on the job? Can you now pay? Which seems like bizarre. That's like 4 months after the fact. Like, can you pay me for the pitch that I did for free? Because for some reason, if the awarded bid gets it, then it feels less of a big deal. But the people that
Right.
are just wasting their time, missing their, kids' like first
Hmm.
T-ball game, I mean, the resentment does kind of build. So, but then I think about how you guys as an agency, as creatives, have to pitch to get clients, but it's a different scale. I mean, we're talking about, hundreds of people at a company employed. And of course you have to, but your agency is paying you to pitch on something. So it's a very, very difficult
It's a weird
conversation.
one.
And I
I mean,
think
there
we're
are
all,
paid pitches as well. They're not super
yeah.
common as far as I know,
Okay.
um, but yeah,
Yeah.
again, it's a really thorny one. I was just curious what the
Yeah.
I don't know what the yeah you don't again you are asking these people for their brain, right? You're asking them
Yeah,
for their insight, and you should. It feels to me naively that some
there should be a
recompense
fit.
for their expertise
Yeah.
is appropriate, but how that would actually work in the real world,
Right.
um,
I
I
mean, I
don't
do
know.
think that it also boils down to like, even if it's something to compensate for childcare or something
Right.
like, if you're not asking the world, but you're asking to make it equitable or to make it fair, because then it just means that like every young director that like doesn't have anything going on in their lives or like needs this is the hungriest one. And so it just like makes it uneven.
Hmm.
And, but I do feel like my relationships with like you don't need to see all the bells and whistles of like the
Right.
most beautiful treatment. Like you're looking through the lens of, do they understand the idea and are they bringing things to the table? And it doesn't need to be this like blown out presentation with like, so I think that's also very helpful to where creatives can kind of set that aside, you're not expecting, but I know
Well,
we have to go.
it's an
So
ongoing discussion that will go on
yeah,
much
thank you for
longer.
asking. I do think I'm going to start integrating that into the podcast, like
Hmm.
undertones. It's a huge, huge part of, I guess I'm trying to educate people on this, but I also, through that, hope that there is some type of awareness or change or education that somehow could help it move in that direction. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. This was
Of
so
course.
cool and we learned so much. So
Lovely
appreciate it.
chatting with you.
Yes, we will keep in touch and chat very soon.
Absolutely.